Man, I'm tired of this shit.
Dude, I was listening to that. Leave it alone.
This is absolute trash.
I don't care. Driver picks the station. Shotgun shuts his cake hole.
Passenger gets first dibs on everything. I have my finger on the button.
You know what? You want to fight about it?
Yeah.
Okay,
fuck
fine.
you.
Hey,
Fuck you.
leave it alone.
No.
It's mine.
Turn your trash off. Now look what you did. Hello and welcome to half of the Dissonant Harmonics podcast. Since nobody would send me $1, I'm still just going to say I'm Josh Fitzgerald. We are doing episode number 6 for the Tidbits series that we're doing. As we said in the social media post, Frasier is off the next 2 weekends, so we are recording separate mini episodes to be released throughout the week. And some of these things are just things that we weren't able to touch to in the show. Mine is mostly going to be album reviews that have not been able to get into the show just due to the fact that there's so many albums coming out over the last couple months. And just this year alone, there's been so many that it's kind of hard to pick and choose what's going to be on the show and what's not going to be on the show. So this is just going to be a little catch 'em up on a few other albums that came out that were originally going to be on the list, but just wasn't really able to make it with other ones coming out. Obviously, last week we reviewed Black Dahlia Murder's album Servitude, and that kind of took first priority over some of these other albums, in my opinion. So I got 4 albums on the little docket today and 1 single. So without further ado, and without Frasier telling me how much these bands suck or these albums suck, let's get to it. So first on my list is Oceano's new album, Living Chaos. So I actually was able to see Oceano a couple years ago with Chelsea Grin and, oh man, it's been forever. I think Whitechapel was the headliner that night, but I could be wrong. It's been a long, long time, and I got spin kicked in the head on that show, so I don't remember a whole lot anymore. So Oceano put out their first new album in, I want to say it's been almost 6 years or 7 years since their last album Revelation came out. And for those who don't know, Oceano was one of the bigger waves of deathcore. Their vocalist Adam Warren is kind of more credited as being one of the more standout vocalists just because of how low he can do his vocals. So they've always kind of stuck out in a way. They've always kind of been experimental with their music, which I personally appreciate. And it's unfortunate I couldn't make Frasier listen to it. So their new album, Living Chaos, is, like I said, their first album in 7 years through Sumerian Records. It was released August 30th. And this was another one of those albums that we've talked about on the show before, that the track list and the album length play it safe. We're only looking at like a 32-minute album. But that being said, the Living Chaos definitely picks up where Revelation's sound was kind of going. Their first couple albums were just kind of more generic deathcore albums, but this one and Revelation started experimenting more, kind of having like an alien tone in a way. Like it kind of reminds me of how Morbid Angel on their first couple albums kind of sounded otherworldly. This one kind of does that too, in a way, if that makes sense. It definitely kind of has an atmosphere to it that doesn't feel natural for the music that they're playing. This one I did notice has a little bit more electronic elements to it that wasn't really present on the last album. So this album's definitely a little bit of a different direction. I mean, you could call this a deathcore or a gent album, but I feel gent is just more of a title that you give a band that you don't know what to call them. This album is just a straight deathcore album that's incorporating more electronic elements without becoming chimey, without putting clean singing in it, anything like that. It's not like the normal albums that Sumerian used to put out back in the day, like Gassing Alexandria, anything like that. But Oceano's always been kind of a staple on their label. So Living Chaos clocks in with only 9 songs at 32 minutes. And like I said, we've talked about this before. Their first single that came out was mass produced. And I believe Wounds Never Healed was the second single that came out. Wounds Never Healed, honestly, is probably my favorite track off this album. It definitely has a swing to it and kind of a groove to it. That's one other thing I've noticed with this album, is that it's kind of more of, it's got more groove sections in it without calling it a groove metal band. Oceano is still very much a deathcore band. Adam Warren's vocals still sound top notch and can push himself outside the realms of generic sounding deathcore vocalists. He has a different range to his voice. And I believe this was the last album with their drummer that they had on this one. It's the only studio album to feature their drummer, Matt Kawanowski, who parted ways in 2022. So the drumming you're hearing on the album is not going to be the drummer that they subsequently take on tour with them. And honestly, I give this album probably like an 8 out of 10. Like, Oceano almost never disappoints. They don't really put out bad albums. They don't really put out, middle of the road albums. They're always going one step up further and further with their music. The guitar tone still sounds nasty. It still sounds what you expect from Oceano. Everything on this album is, if you liked Revelation, the album before, you're going to like Living Chaos. It's still in the same vein without going too much away from their signature sound, but it's enough for it to be old and new fans alike and jump right into it. Next on the docket is, let's see, it's Blood Incantation's Absolute Elsewhere album. So I hadn't really listened to Blood Incantation up until recently, within the last year. And honestly, I can say that they're quickly becoming one of my favorite bands. And mostly due to the fact that you can't really put this band in a corner and say it's this genre or this genre or it's this genre. Blood Incantation's new album, and from what I can tell from their previous album, Time Wave Zero, is the only other album I've really gotten into. Absolute Elsewhere is, the way to describe it, it sounds like an 80s sci-fi movie had a love child with the 80s and 90s Florida death metal scene. And that bastard child grew up listening to Rush. So Absolute Elsewhere is, from what I can tell, it looks like it's supposed to be a concept album. The tracks are Stargate, Tablet 1, Tablet 2, Tablet 3, Message, Tablet 1, Tablet 2, Tablet 3. This album only clocks with 6 songs on it. And it doesn't feel like a short album. This album is very much, these songs are clocking in anywhere from 7 minutes to 11 or 12 minutes. You're going to be sitting on these songs for a good long while before you realize you're even just still sitting on the same song, because these songs shift styles, they shift time signatures. There's all kinds of different things that this album is doing that on paper shouldn't work, but it honestly weirdly works. Like, this album clocks in almost 45 minutes long, and this album is also named after the progressive rock band Absolute Elsewhere. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be the tie-in or what, but this album is, how do you even describe it? It's a death metal album. It's a progressive metal album. It has a progressive rock feel to it, orchestrating clean singing in these sections with their belligerent death metal sound. And their vocalist Paul Riedel is just going absolute ape on this album. And they actually also have a surprise guest on the second track. If it is the second track, I believe it is. Tangerine Dream. And if you don't know who Tangerine Dream is, they were, or I guess still are, an electronic band that was coming out of the 80s that has that kind of 80s synth music that you would hear in the 80s sci-fi movies, like space movies, things like that. So it fit right in there. They had one of the members of their, Thorsten, I'm not going to pronounce that, Quaz Shiching, playing synthesizer on Stargate Tablet 2. And the weird thing is that it fits so well that you don't even almost realize that they are playing on this track. And it's an instrumental track. And it's hard to explain what this album even sounds like to somebody that has no idea what these sounds are or has ever heard a band like this. I would check it out. I give it a 7 out of 10 just because the styles can be so jarringly changed throughout the tracks that, like I said, it does almost feel like you listen to a track. You're sitting on it for about 7-8 minutes. The style shifts from a belligerent death metal song with blast beats, gnarly guitar tones, deep throat shredding vocals, to all of a sudden we're sounding like Fly By Night from Rush. And you ask yourself, well, I'm pretty sure I'm on the next track, right? Nope, I'm still 11 minutes into the main first track. Okay, well, I'm in for a ride. Spark up a doobie and listen to this one, because honestly, if it wasn't illegal here, I would be doing it. Next on the docket is a band that's near and dear to me. So, Oxygen Destroyer has come out with their new album, Guardians of the Universe. So, I believe we've talked about Oxygen Destroyer on the podcast. I know we've talked about it with Andrew because he has been part of that music circle and scene before. So, going into this, for those who don't know, Oxygen Destroyer is a death metal band from Seattle, from close to where I moved from to here. And they are a kaiju themed death metal band. And the really cool thing about them is that their artwork has that death metal feel, but also looks like old kaiju movies or kaiju movie covers. Like Gamera is, from what I can tell, the focus of this newest album. We've had Godzilla off the first album, and they do enough to split it away from any sort of copyright infringement. Like their first album was Born of Nuclear Energy. We all can kind of figure out where that's coming from. Guardian of the Universe. Gamera is called a Guardian of the Universe in the Gamera series, and has a very clear picture of Gamera on the title or on the cover. But this album kind of caught me off guard. So this is another one from Oxygen Destroyer that they are front to back, they're a death metal band. This band is blast beats. Their guitar tone, Jordan's guitar tone, has kind of a twinge of almost a black metal feel with it, but it is fast, it is loud, it is in your face. It's exactly what a death metal soundtrack to a kaiju movie would sound like if we had such a thing, which I think, honestly, these guys should really try to figure out how to do that. But this album, like I said, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit. This is their third album, and the first two albums definitely kind of had a similar feel to them. This one I've noticed has a very similar feel, but they're bringing in new elements into it. I don't know if it's new for them or if it's new just for the listeners. So listening to songs like Drawing Power definitely has kind of more of like a groove, more of a rhythm on it that I didn't expect, instead of just straight blast beats, which is nice to have that break in between some of these songs, in between these different pieces to go into different sections of their songs. They're also known for having very long song names, and I can't sit here for 5 minutes just waiting for the song titles to load. But Shadow of Evil off this new album is probably my favorite. If you're into like that kind of in between. If you're a really big fan of black metal, really big fan of death metal, this album is going to be right in your alley. I don't want to insult anybody, although I don't really care if I do, and say that this one definitely has like, it's a death metal album with black metal production. I don't really want to say that, but that is very similar to how it sounds. And honestly, these guys have to go even further and further and further from this album. Their first album was jettisoned them to way farther and faster than I ever expected. Their second album definitely got so much more attention than the first album. These guys have toured Japan even to bring their kaiju death metal to out there. They currently are, I believe, going on tour with, I want to say, Ghoul between the Pacific Northwest and Oregon. So if you have a chance to go check these guys out, I 100% think you should. That's if you're in that kind of thing. If you aren't, don't spend your money on it. Go do something else. Go do something else that's going to be boring for the rest of your day, rest of your night. If you want to do something fun, go see these guys live. Buy their merch. Do what you got to do to support them. Keep these guys going, because there's a definite bright, shining future to death metal with some of these bands that pop up. And Oxygen Destroyer is definitely holding that torch and definitely leading that charge into whatever we're going to end up seeing over the next 10 years. Let's see. I'm going to save one of my surprise albums for last. A lot of people probably won't even realize this last full album will be the one that is going to be my album of the year so far. So also, before we get into that, Make Them Suffer has come out with a new song called Man of God. And this new album is going to be a self-titled album just titled Make Them Suffer. Make Them Suffer has been around they've been around for a while. 2012, I believe, is when their first album came out for Never Bloom. And they came out around the time that you had like Suicide Silence, you had Oceano, you had all these deathcore bands that were trying to do the deathcore sound with keyboards. Bleeding Through was also doing it a lot, I think, before a lot of these bands did. I think Bleeding Through came out in late 90s, early 2000s, and was, orchestrating their keyboard sections. It's another one you guys should check out, is Bleeding Through. But Make Them Suffer was another band that was doing it at the time, and I believe it was Book and Nile that was on keyboard for that, and I believe she left the band to bring in a new female vocalist that can sing with the band. She's been singing more of the choruses, which is kind of not a big style change, but the big style change is that she also screams and offsets their vocalist's vocal range, so he can focus more on like the heavier stuff, the lower stuff. And I mean, he's already got a crazy set of highs on him, but she is picking up the high screams mantle, and he's doing all the rest. So this new song, Man of God, he's definitely going through, and he's definitely using a lot of his lower vocals on this one. So this song is an absolute ripper. Their vocalist, Sean, I believe his name is Sean, I think it's their vocalist, never disappoints with his vocal styles. He has such a range that makes their music very interesting to listen to. I don't believe he's ever actually really fully gone into clean singing. I think there's been a few sections off of their last album that he might have done a little bit, but it's never been a full staple. But Man of God and Oscillator are the two newest songs that have come out. I believe it'll be the last singles that they do, because this album, I believe, comes out next month. But we already have multiple singles from this. So there's Doom Switch, Ghost of Me, Epitaph, Oscillator, and Man of God. All of these songs are exactly what you want from a band that's called Make Them Suffer. All these songs, there's no middle of the road songs. There's no filler songs that they've released so far. What that says for the album that comes out, well, I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that one. But if it comes down to how these singles have come out, the whole album is going to be, in my opinion, flawless. If that album can take the mantle for my album of the year so far, I won't be surprised, but I'll be happy that it can. And Man of God, I believe, came out last week. That song, I believe, is the opening track off of Make Them Suffer, and it's a good, heavy song. I feel like it is a good song that can get people into heavier music and start kind of bridging the gap into heavier and heavier and heavier music while maintaining its heaviness in its own right. So that's Man of God from Make Them Suffer. My final album, my album of the year thus far, that was going to be actually on the podcast last week, before I stupidly remembered that Black Dahlia Murder had come out and obviously was going to take that place, is going to be the album All Things Shining by Oh Hiroshima. So when you think of a band called Oh Hiroshima, some people like me would think, well, that sounds like it's going to be a heavy band. That could be a metal band. It could be, a hard rock, heavy metal kind of thing. No. Oh Hiroshima is a genre that I've been steadily kind of dipping my toe into, called post-rock. And I almost want to do an episode on just talking about these subgenres that we've seen pop up over the last 10 years. Oh Hiroshima is a band that is labeled post-rock. And for those who don't know what post-rock is, it's a subgenre of rock music that it's more experimental rock music. It's not using the same formula that rock music does. It's not using, wild and wacky guitar solos. You're not getting like an AC/DC song. You're not getting a Guns N' Roses song. You're not getting an Avenged Sevenfold song. You're getting a song or band that may or may not even have vocals. It may be more of a psychedelic rock band that is even further from what we think of for psychedelic rock, Pink Floyd, bands like that. And they're going to have more ambient textures. It's going to be stuff that you don't really think about with rock music, calling itself rock music. If that makes sense. It probably doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. But I've been looking into more of these bands that are in the post-rock subgenre, just because I'm not a big, generic rock fan. It's not my go-to. So going into something with post-rock, and therefore going into the band Oh Hiroshima. Oh Hiroshima caught my attention a couple years ago. They were a band that popped up on rotation with some of my instrumental music, and just kind of slowly followed them, kind of slowly followed the releases that came out. I didn't really dive too deep into them until I found this one. So this album came out this year, and this band has been around for damn near almost 20 years and has been a DIY project of, if I remember correctly, it's two brothers from Sweden that are multi-instrumentalists and have had not really a rotating cast of other people. They've only ever had, I think, one, maybe two past members that have left that they're actually still in contact with, that still will perform shows with them. But their singer, Jacob Hemstrom, definitely is not a rock star. He's not a rock persona singer. He's not somebody that's going to be a big flamboyant David Lee Roth going out there and saying, look at me, I'm the front of this band, I'm the face of this band. His vocal style is very subdued. It's very restrained on some of the older albums. And his vocal style reminds me of something that Maynard from Tool said a long time ago, was that his vocals are just another instrument in the band. And that's kind of the mentality I think of when I think of Oh Hiroshima. So All Things Shining is their latest album, and I was completely under the impression that this is going to be an instrumental album. It's just going to be another one that I can kind of pop on, listen to while I'm at work. I listen to a lot of instrumental music at work as well, so I can focus on everything else instead of the vocals. No, this album is a lot of singing, which is in a way new for them, I feel like. I've gone back and listened to a few of their older albums, and there's a lot less singing. It's just more in certain pieces and sections of the entire song. This album has full vocals over every single track, and I can't praise this album enough. These guys have put in the work. they've definitely honed and dialed in what they want this band to be and sound like. And the first track off this album, Wild Iris, is the song flows. It's got a gracefulness to it that, it saunters into your headphones and just commands your attention enough to say, awesome, I'm here for the rest of the album. There's definitely some more rock elements with this album. There are some definitely, I guess, quote unquote, faster songs for them. You're not going to get 4 on the floor, beats. You're not going to get, a wild, fast, slithery guitar line in the middle of a fast drum fill. It's still going to be very subdued. It's just, this album is faster for their music catalog. This one definitely has the most rock element to it without sacrificing and becoming just a rock band. The second track, Holiness Movement, it sits on a bass line, and it just sits and it sits and it sits. That's all the song needs. These songs have room to breathe without overstaying their welcome. And there's definitely songs on here that retain that old mentality that they had, where it was slower, instrumental, progressive music. Like Deluge is another one of those songs that definitely feels like it would fit in with the old discography. I can't praise this album enough. This album came out in June, on June 28th. If you're going to listen to any album that I'm suggesting and do my little review on today, I'd pick this one. It's not going to be the bridge that brings you into, my side of the train tracks. It's a good album. And you'll find this with a lot of people that listen to metal. People that listen to a lot of metal or are in metal bands, they don't only listen to metal. It's a common misconception. A lot of us listen to a lot of other things. I've said on the podcast, I can get down to country music. I can get down to Taylor Swift. I can get down to some classic rock. I've kind of gone out of it over the last 15, 20 years. Now, considering classic rock could be considered the first Linkin Park album. That's how old I am now. This album's a breath of fresh air from these other albums that I've been sitting with and listening to and getting ready to do this review episode. This album definitely is the one I throw in the middle to kind of give myself a breather. I will try and post some of these videos from, maybe a video from each of these songs or each of these albums on the Facebook page, just so people can kind of get an idea of what these albums are. All these albums they're not vastly different, except for O Hiroshima, but they're different in their own genres enough for somebody to maybe pick up if anybody listens to one of these 4 albums, that's enough for me. These guys, all of these band members and all of these labels that have put out these albums definitely deserve your attention. Depending on if O Hiroshima, I believe they are on a label that produces their physical albums. And if you don't want to support these albums, even just giving them a listen to and just looking at some of their music and just seeing if it's for you. Maybe you know somebody that would like some of these albums. Send it over to them. See if they like them. Just kind of keep the wheel moving. That's how I always look at listening to all these different albums, especially going into this podcast. Since we split up albums and send them to each other, can definitely go and broaden your horizons with music. That being said, I don't know how many of these that Fraser's going to listen to. He's probably not going to listen to any of them because Fraser sucks and he hates metal. And he's not here to defend himself because I'm pretty sure he died. So whether he decides to fight me on the next episode is up to him. So that is all I've got. I believe we will be releasing these episodes throughout the week. Fraser and I can record independently and upload them a little bit easier. Just for right now. This is not a permanent change. We're just going to kind of we're going to keep the ball rolling any way that we can and bring you guys the news, the tunes, whatever else I can say that makes myself sound like the lame dad that I am. And I don't care about what you think. So, that being said, I am still Josh. This is still the Dissonant Harmonics podcast. And I will catch you guys next time.